On today's show, we are breaking down the game of an absolute wrecking ball of a prospect for the 2025 NHL Draft, Shane Vansaghi.
You are Locked On NHL Prospects, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello, and welcome back to Locked On NHL Prospects, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. On this show, we break down everything prospects related for you 5 days a week, Monday through Friday. I'm your host, Sebastian Hyde, the USHL scout over at Elite Prospects, and on today's episode, we're going to be breaking down the game of a player I got to watch a little bit this season, but who was playing in college hockey instead. I'm joined here by Mark, again, from NHL Draft Pros. How's it going, Mark?
I'm great. Always fun to be back and talk some hockey prospects. Love it.
Always a pleasure to have you on the show. And so we'll be breaking down the game of potentially one of the most violent players in the entire draft class this year. He's pretty much the prototype of what you want, or at least what the Florida Panthers would want in their bottom six of a cup final run like they are this season. He's made for modern playoff hockey. And even though the upside in terms of points is not the highest in this draft class, he's certainly a unique player in what he offers teams on draft day. So before we jump into everything here today, today's episode is brought to you by Monarch Money. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNHL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. So, Mark, let's just dive into who this player is. And Shane Vansaghi's been on the scene for quite a little bit of time now. He was part of the NTDP team for good stretches of his D-1 campaign. He played his entire season with the U18 team last season. So he had a lot of experience playing down the lineup, but on the same team like guys like James Higgins and Cole Eiserman and a lot of these other big names that were there last season. And then this year took the jump to college hockey, joining the Michigan State University, which is an absolute powerhouse of the team, which is great for his development in that the staff, the training, all these things are at the highest level basically in college hockey. But the downside was that his minutes were very limited this campaign. He was exclusively playing in the bottom six and averaged about 12 minutes this season throughout the campaign. But he is 6'2", 216 pounds as a right shot right winger. And even though he's one of the older players in this draft class, as an October 11th birthday, as one of the youngest players in college hockey this season, he was also among the most violent. And that's not something you can say about many players in this age group, right?
Absolutely. And the thing is that he stepped into the NCAA and the transition was kind of seamless for him. Given that, he's 6'2", 216 pounds, that kind of helps too. But his game is built around, that reckless, relentless forechecking. He does not stop when he's on the ice. That pace is incredible. He is not afraid to, hit those hard, dirty areas like the corners and then in front of the net. So yeah, he's a player that I thought he played really well for Michigan this year, even though, like you said, he was a bottom six and only averaged 12 minutes a game. He transitioned really well. He ended up with 16 points in 37 games, which is not bad considering the lack of, time on ice that he had. So I thought that he played really well and his transition was really nice.
Absolutely, I'd agree. And he's definitely one of the more unique players to watch in this year's draft class as well, just because the intensity is relentless, the physicality is overwhelming, and the intelligence is growing as well. Right? Like there's a lot to like with this player. So let's just start diving into this player's tools now. And let's start off with the gem of this toolkit, and it's gotta be the physicality, right? Like talk me through just how strong he is, but also the other aspects in his game apart from the strength that just make him so physically dominant.
Yeah, it's not only the hitting that was a nice element of his game this year, it was also his puck protection, the way that he, cycled really well in the ozone. His defensive help was really nice. He supported down low. I thought that, and he used his body to kind of help protect the puck really well. And so those are nice things that you want to see. It's not about, just going around and hitting players. It's also about being able to use your physicality to your advantage and to leverage that in puck battles and winning, puck possession basically. And he did that really well. And like you said, on a stacked Michigan team.
Absolutely. Like he really did I played dominant physical hockey in bottom sixes and was terrorizing players 5 years older than him physically, right? Like really a player that stood out in multiple different dimensions. And I'm just going to like read a little excerpt from our Elite Prospects draft guide, which is now out and posted. If you've not yet read it, go check it out. It's out. I believe McKeens is also now out, right? Like everyone has their things posted now,
It's
right?
dropping next week. Yeah, we just
Next week.
released our rankings, and the book's coming out next week.
Amazing, right? So I'm going to read out a little thing at the end of the profile on Shane Vansaghi, which is basically saying, though he lacks agility and explosiveness and speed, his package of abilities is just too valuable to pass up on in the first round. If he can add just a little bit of that speed, getting his skating grade closer to NHL caliber and becoming an even better forechecker, he could become a force in the league. He would assure himself of at least a fourth line spot, but violent power wingers of his type, a rare breed, rarely stay down the lineup. They typically move up and complement skilled players in the top six and start racking up the points later on in their careers and significantly outperforming their draft slots. And I want to kind of ask you, how, does that seem about right for you? And also, then building off of that, how do you evaluate his skating? Because it's not the prettiest, but there's a lot of intensity to it, right?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, the skating short strides, he's got to work on that stride extension, a little bit more length in his stride. However, he does motor around the ice really well. He is a tenacious skater. He does not stop. He keeps going. And when you move a lot on the ice, it just seems like you're skating well. And he does that really to an exceptional degree. Actually, you don't notice that the skating mechanics are not really refined. However, because he's always in motion and he goes with a reckless abandon, that he kind of passes the eye test, I guess you could say.
Yeah, he really does, and I think also on top of that with the skating, I think that he's just gonna get better over time as well once he plays like more minutes, right? Like I think something that's perhaps a bit underrated with players who take the college route and in their draft year campaigns and play a lot less minutes than they would in junior hockey is that they're being pushed a little bit less, especially on the ice in competitive environments, to kind of boost that skating. I think that once he plays a bit higher up that lineup, up the depth chart, you're going to see him like work the mechanics out a little bit. And he's never going to be like an above average skater. He doesn't even have to be an average skater because his game doesn't rely on it whatsoever. But what his game does rely on a little bit more is his package of offensive tools, because even though this is a violent physical winger, he brings some valuable things as well with the puck on his stick. The shot is pretty heavy. He was able to score quite a couple goals there this season, even though he was playing down the lineup, right? Like largely on that fourth line. And I mean, 6 goals, 10 assists, 16 points. Nothing jumps off the page here, but he was still able to just contribute there with Michigan State University this season and like finished relatively respectively in like point tallies. Like he outperformed like Red Savage in points and other players who are older than him and have a decent, at least like a draft hype behind them from previous seasons. But I wanted to also ask you how that passing ability is currently kind of like how it works currently, and maybe one or two tweaks that could really make it take another step forward.
Yeah, I think if he simplifies his passing options a little bit better, and he did that occasionally, you saw glimpses of the playmaking abilities. But his relentless motor sometimes kind of impedes his passing abilities because he's always trying to go, full speed. But sometimes it's all about slowing the play down. We had this discussion, and some players who have that hockey IQ and that playmaking ability, they just tend to know when to speed up or when to slow things down. But he was just going so fast that even offensively, in terms of like defense, he was going, super fast, but offensively, he was going fast too. And at times he was just rushing plays. And I think that if he would just kind of tone it back, knowing when to change that pace, I think that would help out his overall playmaking ability.
Absolutely. And last but not least, here with the tools for this segment, we have the puck handling. And on our Elite Prospects grading scale, we have this at a 5.5 grade, so slightly above average in terms of NHL projection. And I think that what really like made him exciting for us as a group at Elite Prospects is the flashes of dynamic entries that we see from him off the rush. Like there were sequences where he would dangle through two defenders and make his way to the center of the ice and fire a quick in motion wrist shot with real power behind it, where he's able to layer these different things and execute both the handling and the shooting at pace, at speed, and in motion. And that's something that when you combine at the NHL level with some vicious physicality, I think that's a pretty good recipe for success. Wouldn't you agree?
Absolutely. And I think that, you said when he's got the puck on his stick and he's got that pace, that is the time when you're trying to do, stick handling and puck control and whatnot. I don't have a problem with that, right? I wouldn't consider him like, a side to side type stick handler. He's more of a north south type stick handler, which is fine by me as long as he can get, through that. And the thing with the stick handling is that he's so big and so strong that he has that, ability to, protect and shield the puck. So that was a kind of a nice thing in terms of the puck handling abilities, which is that ability to protect the puck and, like you said, show some glimpses of that fine touch that some players need.
Absolutely, but we're going to delve a bit more into the mental side of the game, and you already gave us a bit of a preview of that, of how his game could improve if he were to hit the brakes sometimes and slow down a little bit more. But we'll dig into that in the next segment. First, we have a quick message from our sponsors here at Locked On NHL Prospects. Ever check your bank account and wonder, where did all my money go? Between dining out, online shopping, and entertainment, it's easy to lose track. That's where Monarch Money comes in, your personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money isn't just a budgeting app, it's a complete financial command center. You can track all of your accounts, investments, and spending in one place so you can stop just managing your money and start building wealth. When I started using Monarch, I realized just how much I was spending on food delivery. Now I budget smarter and save more. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNHL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONNHL for half off your first year. All right, let's keep digging into the game of Shane Vansaghi here in the second segment, where we're looking a bit more on the habits and the overall maybe engagement in his game as well, because that motor tenacity is as big of a part to play in his projection as his intelligence is. But we will start with the IQ here to kick us off. But I think that this is a very intelligently and maybe underratedly intelligent player who is able to really adapt to different situations. And while yes, there are definitely areas to improve on, like slowing things down a little bit and not always overextending on rushes, and maybe using his line mates a little bit more like use cohesively, perhaps in terms of working as a unit rather than three individuals. But what's your take on the intelligence, and what's maybe an element that stood out or surprised you this season?
Yeah, we kind of covered a little bit already about the hockey IQ and his vision and hockey sense. There are glimpses of it. I think that, in his mind, I think that he knows that he's a role player, a forechecking type forward, and so I think that he just needs to realize that sometimes you can use your intelligence instead of that physicality to make plays develop. And at times he could have retrieved the puck or whatnot, but he was instead engaging physically. And using the players, your teammates, is another aspect of that game that he has to improve upon a little bit more. I think that he's kind of got the blinders on sometimes. He's just he's like, okay, I'm going to the net and that's it, instead of realizing that use some of your teammates a little bit more sparingly, I guess. And I think that will come with time, though. We got to remember he's only 17, 18 years old, playing in the NCAA against 20 plus year olds. And I think that transition, you see it a lot of these young players that come from the NTDP or USHL or whatever the case may be, and they have a hard time keeping up, I guess you could say, with that speed and intensity. He's got the physical tools for that. He's just got to realize that he can be a little bit more tactical in terms of running the plays better.
Yeah, for sure. And one maybe like a little like question I wanted to ask you to play around with in terms of who the best players are in this draft in different categories is how would Shane Vansaghi compare to Kayshawn Aitchison in physicality, and how would he compare with Carter Bear in terms of intensity?
Yeah, I put him pretty close up there, to be honest with you. I mean, if you look at the tape, like Shane Vansaghi he is intense when he's on the ice and he hits with authority. Kashawn Aitchison is a little bit different in terms of he's a little bit more selective in his hitting, whereas Shane Vansaghi is just a wrecking ball. Like he is nonstop hitting the entire time he's out there. Carter Bear's got good intensity, but the thing with Carter Bear though is that he uses that intelligence a little bit more in terms of the playmaking capabilities. Carter Bear is a really good playmaker, and so I think that there's similarities, but there's also differences when it comes to those two prospects.
Just to highlight just how intense this player really is, in our elite prospects draft guide, for every single player profile that we have, we give each player like 2 or 3 badges, and each badge can represent a variety of different things. Our favorite badge that we have is got that dog in him, and Shane Vansaghi's 3 badges are got that dog in him, got that dog in him, and got that dog in him. He's the only player, I believe, in this draft class who we gave the same badge multiple times to, and it cleared the row. It's all of them, right? This guy is just so much fun to watch. And the more I'm watching the Stanley Cup finals, right, and seeing the Florida Panthers play their brand of hockey, which is very recognizable, the more I'm seeing Shane Vansaghi kind of going down that path and making a contending team in the late first round incredibly happy.
He is the type of player that you want on a playoff team. He has that intensity. He'll get in your face. He's going to crash the net. He's going to body check. He does everything, like you said, a Florida Panther. If the Florida Panthers, wanted another player of their style, Shane Vansaghi is like the perfect fit. He would walk into that dressing room and be right at home. Trust me, that's the kind of player. But you know what? Those are the kind of players that you need to win playoff hockey, as you have seen the Florida Panthers do this season and last season. And any team, especially in this draft, in the mid to late first, if they're looking to bulk up their team in terms of playoff hockey style, then Shane Vansaghi, you have to really consider him for that placement.
Absolutely, and just as a fun idea, like remember last season when at the draft the Edmonton Oilers traded a future first round selection in order to get the 31st overall pick, I believe it was, to pick Sam O'Reilly. Or I think yeah, they made a trade to get that pick.
Yeah.
I would love the idea of the Florida Panthers going out and acquiring a late first round draft pick because they have nothing to actually pick him in this range, and just put him in their lineup in training camp and just see if he can fit. Because of all the players in this draft class, is there anyone that could play a more cohesive NHL role next season than Shane Vansaghi as a banger on a third line on a fourth line?
Oh, probably not. I mean, in terms of NHL ready prospects in this draft class, there might be a handful, and I think like if you look in the first round, Michael Misa maybe, and Shane Vansaghi. To be honest with you, I can't think of any other player that could step in and be play in the NHL. But I think Shane Vansaghi, if he could fix up his skating, and there's no doubt that he probably could.
He's such a fun player, but another thing I wanted to highlight with him is he's not just like physical, going out of his way to be physical. Like often, if you see that profile of player and you think of them defensively, you might assume that they drag themselves out of position, that they might be even a defensive liability because they're only looking to finish checks left and right. This is a player who I found was very proactive with his physicality this season, who was really intelligent defensively with how he was using that, and was just very disruptive with his stick, with his body, with his anticipation on the defensive side of the puck. It's also a reason that he was just such a dominant bottom 6 piece in college hockey this season. It wasn't just because he lit players up with big hits. It was because he locked things down defensively as well. So talk me through a bit more how maybe the intelligence contributes to that defensive impact for Shane Vansaghi.
Yeah, I think that, defensively, he was really responsible. And I have to admit, you look at a young player that comes into the NCAA and you kind of worry about positionally how they, respond, I guess you could say. And he definitely played a really good role. Supported down low, was blocking passing lanes or using his stick well, cycle the puck excellent. These little things that players need to know defensively, especially. Uh, he controlled that and he did it really well. So that was a nice thing. And it wasn't like you said, always, going out there and hitting. He used his stick or his intelligence sometimes to, cause turnovers. And that's exactly what you want from a prospect.
Absolutely agreed. Like, I think overall that this is a player who thinks the game well, but maybe more than just actively thinking the game well. I think he has a very good intuition for the game of hockey. He has good instincts on the ice, and he finds himself in good positions, supportive positions, where he's helping his teammates both offensively and defensively. And once he starts getting bigger minutes in college, hopefully already this upcoming season, look to him to really, really boom in terms of production because yeah, as we wrote there at Elite Prospects in the draft guide, this is exactly the kind of player that many teams want as a complement, a physical, intelligent, responsible complement to your elite skill guys up the lineup. But we're going to wrap up the show looking at where you might go on draft day, which NHL teams would be the best fits, and which players make the most direct player comps for Shane Vansaghi. But first, a quick message from our sponsors here at Locked On NHL Prospects. All right, let's wrap up the show here in the final segment, talking about the wrecking ball that is Shane Vansaghi here with Mark from NHL Draft Pros and McKeen's Hockey. Where does this player go on draft day, right? I think there's a relatively large range, but it can't go far into the second round, especially after these playoffs, right?
Absolutely. I mean, there's a prototypical player that you want for playoff, and Shane Van is built for playoff hockey. And so I personally think that he's probably late first because of the depth of this draft. I think late first, early second for sure. And especially those later teams that, might want to look up to beef up their pool, playoff prospect pool, I guess. He's a player that could potentially, land. I mean, he could go from anywhere from 25 to we'll say 35, I think is probably his range more than anything in this draft class.
Absolutely. I think that makes sense as a broad range for this player, especially after these playoffs, right? Like the Florida Panthers are just showing again and again how much physicality plays into playoff hockey and just that war of attrition that is like the Stanley Cup final. And yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. But which teams that are selecting in this range maybe fit that bill the best in terms of what they're looking to add to their teams in this offseason, what maybe changes are happening in terms of the leadership with those teams. And on that topic, the LA Kings come to mind because Ken Holland, the former GM of the Edmonton Oilers, is now the general manager in Los Angeles. And of course, they have a director of scouting who's, I think, had the job for like almost 20 years. It's one of the longest held positions there among head scouts across the entire league. But you got to think that Holland has some kind of influence on that selection. And after seeing maybe his former team lose for a second consecutive Stanley Cup final to a team built like Florida, Shane Vansaghi could make some sense for Los Angeles, no?
Absolutely. I mean, and you look at Los Angeles and you look at LA's last couple of drafts, they've drafted pretty big. Like last year was Liam Greentree. He's 6'3". You had Quentin Byfield a few years ago. He's 6'5". So I mean, Shane Vansaghi, 6'2", 216 pounds, and he fits that bill that the bottom six type player with that non-stop compete. I mean, yeah, this is a kid that would definitely fit in really well with LA. A combination that they have of skill plus that tenacity, that would be really, really nice fit for him for sure. At 24, LA's picking.
Exactly. And it wouldn't be an episode of having you on the podcast without having your team, the Philadelphia Flyers, as a potential destination as well for this player, because we seem to always be picking players that would fit in well with Danny Briere's Flyers. But why would you, as a Flyers fan, want a player like Shane Vansaghi?
So, and the Flyers they have two later picks. They got 22 and either 31 or 32, depending on how the finals end up. I don't know if they would be inclined to select Vansaghi at 22. Maybe they make a little trade back. LA's been known to do that where they drop back a little bit because they see a player that they want, just like they did last year with Liam Greentree. And I think that if I mean, if the Flyers decide to, that they want to beef up their bottom six, I think that Shane Vansaghi would be a great fit. And he is a prototypical Flyer player. I mean, the game that he plays is a mold of Flyer hockey, and that is compete, physicality, in your face kind of hockey. And I think that he would be an unreal fit for the Philadelphia Flyers for sure.
And last but not least, here among the teams that were linking here to Shane Vansaghi's profile, at least, the Washington Capitals, because this is a team that already has quite a lot of physicality through its lineup. But one thing it could add would be in that like bottom six capacity, especially. And if you could have a player like Vansaghi learning under the tutelage of Tom Wilson, not only in terms of combining that violence with offensive ability, but also in getting under opponent's skin, that is not going to be a fun team, especially when you add Ryan Leonard into that mix. The entire right wing core is just hell for opponents.
Yeah, listen, if you have a Shane Vansaghi going to Washington, I mean, what a better fit. Sorry, Flyers fans, but Washington, like you said, you have Tom Wilson and Ryan Leonard. I mean, who better to learn from than those two players? And, their styles are very similar, all of them, except, obviously Tom Wilson and Ryan Leonard have a little bit more offensive upside. But I don't think that, Vansaghi lacks that offensive upside. I think that he's just the role that he plays, but I think that he does have a potential for a little bit more offensive output. And I think that, like you said, next year and maybe the year after that, a couple more years of development in the NCAA, I think that you'd be surprised that Shane Vansaghi might put up more points than we anticipate for sure.
I fully agree, and like it might almost be like a Zach Hyman kind of role where he lands with a team that has elite players like Hyman did in Toronto, and just ends up being the best profile to slot in on their wing, and maybe gets a bit of a quicker path to playing bigger minutes up the lineup. And I mean, he's definitely a player I think who could like elevate his game in that kind of situation. So if we're talking about Shane Vansaghi's ceiling, like the most likely projection is probably a bottom six wrecking ball winger who brings physicality and all of this. But in terms of the ceiling, if he were theoretically playing in a top six, let's not say with like McDavid and Draisaitl level players, but with like maybe like comparables of like Ryan Nugent Hopkins and like and maybe Draisaitl. Like you have one elite player and you have one really really good player. How many points could a player like Shane Vansaghi put up in his prime in the NHL?
Yeah, I mean that's again, he'd have to fix up some parts of his game, especially the skating. If you're going to be in a top six role, your skating has to be half decent. And like I said, because he doesn't necessarily slow the play down like some of the higher cerebral players, I guess, that lack that skating ability. However, if he were to, I could see he could potentially play on a second line as a supportive role, I guess you could say. I mean, and then you stick him in front of the net, and no one's going to move him. I think of like say Bill Zonin is that big net front presence, and Shane Vansaghi could do that no problem and clean up all kinds of goals just sitting in front of the net in the danger area there. So, point wise, hard to say. I mean, 50 ish, 40, 50 points. Maybe I'm talking upside, but yeah, it depends on he's got some elements of his game that he has to fix before we can, foresee that, I guess you could say.
For sure, but he's definitely a player that's going to have an easier time getting opportunities and minutes than other guys that are going to be available in this range, and that's always going to boost a player's like likelihood to reach that ceiling a little bit as well, which is something to keep in mind. But in terms of floor, this might be one of the more attractive things about this player as well, is that he's a very likely player to contribute, right? Like even if he's not in a top nine capacity, at worst, he's probably like your 13th forward who you bring in come playoff time to just like eat up opposition fourth lines and just dominate the play physically, right?
Absolutely. I mean, in terms of him playing in a bottom six role, I mean that's kind of almost like where he belongs. And playoff hockey, it would be his cup of tea. So I don't see any issues with him, landing on a team that when they need that playoff, performer, Shane Vansaghi could be that player for sure.
And last but not least, here to wrap up the show, a segment that I always find difficult, but we have to do because the people love it, and that is the player comps. Which players play like Shane Vansaghi? And one of them we already kind of mentioned here, and that's Tom Wilson of the Washington Capitals, but a light version, right?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, he doesn't bring that offensive upside that Tom Wilson does. But in terms of like intensity, getting, into people's face and being a pest, basically a pest, he has that potential. So, I could see that. You have a couple of other players though that I think that probably fit the bill a little bit better.
I would agree. And first and foremost, we have a player who is now retired, but has a legacy of multiple Stanley Cup championships at the end of his career. Pat Maroon, a fan favorite across the league now, and a player who just brings that physicality and playoff bite and elevates his game when it matters most. He's just like maybe not like the ceiling for a player like Shane Vansaghi. I think there's more like offensive upside maybe with him. But even if he ends up as a fourth liner, you're still getting a guy like Pat Maroon that's pretty valuable, right?
Oh, it's unreal. I mean, Pat Maroon was, he was a winner, a playoff guy for sure. And so if you can even come close to a Pat Maroon, that would be unreal. And you know what? The thing with Pat Maroon is that he wasn't a great skater either, but he got the job done. And so Shane Vansaghi can say, you know what? If I improve my skating a little bit more, I could even be possibly, in that realms, which is really nice. So yeah, that's a great comp for sure.
And last but not least, here we have a much younger player. He's only 23 years of age, but just had a really great breakout campaign with the New York Rangers, and that's Will Cooley, who just scored 20 goals and 45 points in 82 games. I think that in terms of what they bring, in terms of intensity, yes, physicality, yes, but also like one touch scoring ability and deft handling flashes, but not like dominant puck skills, but puck skills that like surprise you every once in a while. I think there's some parallels there.
Yeah, absolutely. Will Cooley, a good old Spitfire. So yeah, you know what? It's a nice comp, actually. To be honest with you, I think that Will Cooley is probably a little bit better skater than Shane Vansaghi, but the intangibles are there, and like we said, we saw some glimpses of that offensive potential, I guess, in Shane Vansaghi. So I like that one too.
Perfect. But that wraps things up then for the show here today on Shane Vansaghi, a player who brings such bite, intensity, and physicality alongside some blossoming flashes of intelligence and dynamism. But if he can learn to, well, A, get better on his feet because the skating is a bit ugly at the moment, and B, slow down sometimes and use his pace to access space not only behind defenses, but in front of them, this is a player that could really elevate some guys in a middle six capacity in the NHL. And maybe it won't even take all that long to get there. But that's all here from me today. Thank you so much for listening. As always, if you're listening on your favorite podcasting platform, please do make sure to make us your first listen of the day. For your second listen, you can head on and check out Locked On Fantasy Hockey, where Flip and Steel break down everything you need to know to build yourself a competitive and sustainable fantasy roster. Thank you as well to Mark for hopping on once again. It's always a pleasure having you here on the podcast. And that wraps things up here. So thank you for listening. Adios. Goodbye. That's all for today.
See ya.